today my discussion on objects is early printed books. So between 14 and 19, as you heard, I led this large project focused on 15th century printed books, whose objective, historical question, was really how did European society, which was transitioning between the Middle Ages and the early modern period, react to technological change, the invention of printing with movable type. So basically, how did an invention become a revolution? Incunabula, books printed between 1450 and 1500, there are 28,000 editions surviving today for a total of 500,000 copies, which are kept in public libraries, 4,000 or around 4,000, mostly in Europe and the United States. The world of research on incunabula, it's very digitally integrated. Information about the bibliographical information, author, print and printing, author, title, imprint, and where the copies of those editions are today, it's coordinated by the Incunabula Short Title Catalogue run by the British Library. Information about typographical details, in particular, is instead coordinated worldwide by the Gesamtkatalog der Wiegendrucke, run by the Staatsbibliothek in Berlin. If we want to work on the content, the multiple texts included in these books, we have Texting, which I created at the Bodleian Library, and is still ongoing. While instead, finally, if we want to look at the history of these books as reconstructing their physical life. And we have material evidence in incunabula, which I created in 2009 and is, of course, ongoing. And here we captured information about the life of each copy from the moment it was printed until the time it got into the library where it is today. The main point with printed books is that where the book was printed and where the book is today tells us very little of where the book has been during the 500 years of its history and existence. Books moved extensively over this 500-year period. So capturing the movement was absolutely essential for the research that I set with the project. And there is two types of movement. There is distribution that was happening in the 15th century. Basically, printing a book was successful if the printer were able to distribute all the copies. And often distribution meant distributing beyond the place of production. It's fundamentally important to capture. But we have very, very little documents that survive about this. But we have 500,000 books which embody the information. And then, of course, there is survival, how these books survived from the 15th century onward. Of course, the majority has disappeared. But so what can we learn from those that survive? So the challenge here was to convert physical evidence contained in the books into historical evidence. And the way I went about to set this up was basically to track the mobility of the books by tracking the evidence that of their use contained in the books. How did I do that? An example of a work of Aristotle printed in Venice and today in the Bodleian Library. As you can see, the book was printed in Venice, but then it was used in Salzburg, then Weissenau, the Great Britain. So the record in MEI starts with the bibliographical information which is imported from the ISTC of the British Library, and we concentrate on the early users. So the first evidence comes from the coat of arms of Wenceslas Brack, who was a physician active in Salzburg. So this eventually immediately tells us the book was printed in Venice and immediately shipped to Salzburg. The record of this first block of provenance includes information about the place, which we then geocode with georeferences, the area, Austria, the name, the period, and of course also the type of evidence that is allowing us to provide this information, with links to a depository of images of provenance that we, CERL, the Consortium of European Research Library, of which I'm the secretary, created a few years ago. So we put the evidence there and we link it to the records. Then the book was bequeathed to the Premonstratensians of Weissenau in Germany, and that again, the evidence we have from inscriptions. So the second block of provenance is this time Weissenau, Germany, the period, the owners, and even decoration and binding is here because we understand that that part of the finishing of the book was added at that time. The book must have stayed there, and this we deduce not from physical evidence, but from overall history. It must have been staying there until 1802, when the collection of Weissenau, like hundreds of others, was secularized by Joseph II. And so the books probably moved to large depositories like the Munich State's Bavarian Library, and from there sold as duplicate because it was purchased on the antiquarian market by the classicist Samuel Butler in the 18th century. That is the third block of provenance. So the book moved from Venice to Salzburg, to Weissenau, to England, and at these sales, it was purchased by the Bodleian Library. In the same manner, we also capture information of anonymous annotations. Early printed books are full of incredibly valuable marginal annotations that not always you can reconduct to an individual, an owner, but tell us valuable historical information. This, for example, is Ortus Sanitatis printed in Strasbourg, but clearly immediately shipped down to Italy, where it was used by a physician, and that covers the first page with medical recipes. And we know this from paleographical evidence. So we don't know the owner, and in the block of provenance, though, we transform this evidence in historical evidence because we tag it as Italian and 16th century, and this based on paleographical expertise. And so in this way, we capture the movement anyway. There are various satellite databases that support the core one, and one in particular is one where owners of incunabula, where we include the authority information about the former provenance and former owners. In this, if you type Weissenau, for example, you will see that there are linked to it 48 records. By clicking that, we list the various editions in MEI, and in the facets on the side by holding institution, we have an automatic reconstruction of the dispersed collection of Weissenau, because you can see where the books are today. In Oxford, in Tübingen, in Cambridge, in Harvard, Venice, Dallas, Princeton. As more libraries work with us adding the provenance information, the more we reconstruct this dispersed collection. So this work we have done now for almost 16,000 editions, so we just passed half of the surviving one, in multiple copies for over 64,000 copies. These are incunabula coming from 681 libraries in 32 countries around the world, in 4 continents. And they've been created by almost 300 editors, both librarians and scholars. And as you can see, we are in the process of reconstructing over 27,000 dispersed collections, both institutionals and of individuals. This is the map of the areas where records are from. So with this kind of very rich data, what kind of analysis we can do? We can finally understand trends of distribution, so pertaining to the economic history of the impact revolution. For example, which are the copies printed in Germany and exported early on to Italy. This is a case where is the famous copy printed in Mainz in 1459, very early, of Guglielmo Durandos. The copy was in Venice in San Giorgio Maggiore, today is in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. There is the inscriptions that says that the copy was purchased in 1461. So 2 years after early printed in Mainz, the book already found its way to the market in Italy, in Venice. Another kind of analysis is the reception and use of books, so the social history. And more and more now we do copy census, which means we look at all the surviving copies of one edition to really understand who were the users and how they used these books. So during COVID, we did the copy census of the first edition of Dante, printed in Florence in 1481, with very special illustrations based on drawings by Botticelli. 180 copies in 135 libraries. I wrote to all these libraries. They sent me pictures when they often didn't know, could not decipher, decode the early hands who left notes and marginal notes. And we completely reconstructed the early distribution and later collecting of this. This can be done more and more often today because we centralized the data. This is one of them, the copy today in Novara. Of course, was printed in Florence, but the decoration added by hand in the initial is Venetian. And then I was able to recognize this information. You see Munich in tip. Well, that is a sign that the book was in Munich Staatsbibliothek and it was sold as a duplicate. At that point, the market, in Novara Public Library purchased and brought the book back. So this is important of the even more minute detail. Finally, the reconstruction of dispersed collections, how we do it. I'll give you an example. This is evidence from books coming from monasteries from all over Europe, today in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, a collection I worked on for many years. You can see hundreds of libraries are present there. One of the books was this Latin Bible, printed in Venice and still, and now in the Bodleian Library. The inscription is that of the Benedictines of San Giorgio Maggiore of Venice, with even their early shelf mark. So that is the monastery today, as you know, is the place of the Foundation Giorgio Cini. The sources are multiple, from inscriptions to library catalogs to indeed decorations depicting San Giorgio and the dragon. And these are various inscriptions in the books we located today pertaining to different periods, but of equally valuable importance is external evidence, documents, list of historical library catalogs, but mostly list of sequestrations and due to the Napoleonic secularizations, so list of books that were taken to Padua and then taken to Paris, restituted to Venice or not restituted at all. We, with colleagues Reins and Prosdochmi, wrote an article about it, which appeared in this volume on how the secularization of religious institutions transformed the Library of Europe, whether because they were shutting down or because they contributed to creating new libraries. So in Owners of Incunabula, San Giorgio Maggiore now has 181 records linked to it. 31 libraries around the world, and 76 historical copies. These are copies which we know from the documentary evidence that were at a certain point in time in San Giorgio, but then because of historical reasons were scattered all around, and we still don't know where they are today. Most likely not destroyed, but simply in libraries who have not catalogued with us yet. So at the end of the project, we wanted to communicate the results of our research with the general public. So we organized a conference at the Correr in Venice. And that conference was brought last year to Buenos Aires by a publisher, Ana Mosqueda, who was particularly interested. So what we did with this exhibition was to communicate the latest research, most often still unpublished, with making very good use of digital resources, technology, graphic design, but to explain complex data simply, clearly, effectively. We made 16 videos using a lot of freely available digitizations from 35 libraries around the world, many from Munich. They did a great digitization program. Some of them, as you can see, we made, I would say, effective use of graphic for showing the passage of text from manuscript to print, like in this video. We also used full immersion projection of manuscripts, hundreds of manuscripts from the Venetian collections, to give an understanding and a feeling of what was Europe before printing, which was the fundamental demand question and factor. Again, graphic design to show that Venice was not just famous for one printer, Aldus Manutius, but it became the leading place in Europe because there were 200 printing shops that we located in the city. We showed, for example, how while everybody knows the Gutenberg Bible about the beginning of printing, we showed how before printing the Bible, Gutenberg actually printed grammar books. And these grammar books only survived as recycled material because they were all thrown away, because during the centuries, grammar books, books for primary education, were considered not valuable, useless material. Today, these are the most valuable things for us incunabulist. So this is about the discussion we had recently about perception of useless or useful, and the kind of selection that inevitably is influenced by contemporary societies. Indeed, we showed how the most printed book and the bestseller and the cheapest of the 15th century were these Salterioli da Putti, little psalters for kids to learn, which were printed in the loads. And this is now one of 2 surviving copies in the world. And they costed only between 1 and 4 soldi. So then we had to explain what does it mean in 15th century, 1 or more soldi, and that was, we compare it with the cost of living of the time. We looked at, of course, we had to explain that there were many Bibles printed in vernacular languages, not just Luther. Luther was not the first one to democratize knowledge by printing in German the Bible. And so on. The question at the end we asked, should we continue? And we received 5 huge volumes full of wonderful messages from people, from kids to teenagers to adults, about why we should continue. At the time we had done 10% of the work, and now we are 12% of the work. And how we will continue, well, I've just received funding from working on the incunabula in American collections. There are 50,000, and we want to understand how they ended up there. So hopefully this project will start next year. This is again one case. For one library in Harvard alone, there are 372 former books from former monastic places all over Europe. Harvard is one of more or less 700 libraries with incunabula in the United States. That is European heritage that we want to join up with what is there and explain how we ended up there. So if I have to summarize, the perfect cocktail for this kind of research is 1/3 high-level cataloging, 1/3 good technology, and 1/3 collaboration. And of course, the slice of lemon is time, which takes what it takes to do what we want to achieve. Thank you.